What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. If you're new around here, my name's Matt and this is my dirty old hoe. Today I'm going to show you what you need to be looking for if you're in the market for a used excavator. And don't forget, if you liked the video or you found this information useful, make sure you hit that thumbs up button down there. It helps me out. So let's just start off with what is an excavator. If you're looking for one, you probably already know what it is, but it's basically a machine typically on tracks with an arm out here and a bucket, and you can do a lot of trenching, excavation, digging pits. You can tear down trees, buildings. They're pretty handy for just about everything there is, and I don't know if I could live without one anymore. They are very expensive to own and maintain. They can be big money pits or they can make you a ton of money. It just depends on how you're going to use it, what you really need it for. So this is a 2000 model Komatsu PC75, which I've owned for about 5 years now, and it's in lots of my previous videos. If you haven't seen those, links up in the corner there, go check those out. But it's been a good machine for me. It's been very reliable. That being said, there is a ton of issues with it. They're all small, little annoying issues mostly, but they've all just kind of added up to a point now where I'm kind of on the fence about fixing them all or selling it and buying a new machine, which I'm sure will have its own problems. So I figured if I'm thinking about selling a machine and buying another one, it's a good time to go over everything to look at. And if you guys are in the market, maybe you can find this information useful. So probably the first piece of advice I can give you if you're looking for a machine is don't go to look at it in the dark, which is what I did with this one. If you can avoid it, definitely check it out in the daytime. Working a busy schedule like I do, usually working 6-10 hour days at least, doesn't leave a whole lot of time to go check out a machine. I bought this one late in the year, so it was dark when I got off of work. Drove, I think, 2 hours to go look at the thing. And did I get screwed on it? No, I got what I paid for, but I didn't get as good a deal as I probably could have if I looked at it during the day. There was a lot of things I overlooked because it was dark and I was in a hurry. So you definitely want to take your time and do your due diligence. So something I want to mention right now that I forgot to when I was recording this is that I paid $20,000 for this machine 5 years ago in slightly better condition. It came with a 1-foot bucket and a 2-foot bucket, and I added the hydraulic thumb later. Now, cosmetics are not nearly as important to me or to a piece of equipment as some people might say they are. It doesn't really matter what the paint looks like, doesn't really matter if it's got some scratches on it, but the cosmetics can tell you a lot about its life and how it was taken care of. This machine looks worse now that I've owned it, because as much as I'm ashamed to admit it, I have neglected it some. But I've also tried to help it, and that's partly what makes it so ugly. As all these white areas that I primered up here, I've just never got around to putting the yellow on. But they were all rusty spots that I sanded down and put some primer on them. See, I actually have a hole here that I just never got around to patching. But I had time to hurry up and spray bomb some primer on there to keep it from getting worse. So I sanded them down and threw some primer on them. So as I said, the cosmetics can tell you a lot about the history of the machine and how it was taken care of. This one really isn't in too bad a shape cosmetically. It needs a good bath right now because there's lots of algae growing on it. But it does not look too bad whenever it's cleaned up. This machine has a short swing radius, which that means is that's the distance that when you turn 90 degrees to your tracks, that's how much this counterweight hangs over the back of the tracks here. This one only sticks out about a foot past the tracks, whereas some machines stick out quite a bit past the tracks. So that makes it a lot easier to forget where you're at and swing that back of the machine into objects or dirt or whatever. You'll see a lot of machines where this counterweight, where these scrapes are, is completely polished clean because they constantly are swinging into dirt piles and it wears all the paint off down to bare metal. So it is in my opinion that if it is possible, you're going to want to try to buy a machine off of a small company or a single use owner, somebody that hasn't put 100 different guys into the seat and let them swing it around and smash it up. Somebody that owns and operates that machine is going to take a lot better care of it than somebody that has some minimum wage employee that they just plunk in the seat and say, here, move the dirt. So preventative maintenance goes a long ways to keeping any machine tight and functional, and I would say excavators definitely benefit the most from preventative maintenance, as in greasing, fluid changes, general care, because there's so many pivots on an excavator. So a pivot is going to be, I'd say, the biggest issue on an excavator. Undercarriages generally don't see as much wear as, say, a bulldozer or a track machine that moves around a lot. These do move a good bit, but not as fast, not as hard on them. You know, all your work is done with the arm. So all these pivots take a beating, especially if the machine digs a lot of rock. If it's digging topsoil its whole life, it's got an easy life. It's digging into cushy, fluffy material. If you're moving rubble with it all the time, it gets a little banged up. The bushings will see more wear. So every single place you have a pivot has a pin and a bushing in it, and those will start to get sloppy. Certain pins and bushings are a lot easier to replace than others, so take that with a grain of salt. If you have a loose pin, say right here on your coupler, you know, this pin just has a cotter pin holding it in there. That pin will just drive right out. You can easily press out the bushing and throw a new pin and bushing in there, barring it's not worn completely through the bushing and actually into the dog bone link here, causing a lot of issue. So when you're looking at a used machine, check out all your grease fittings. You can tell if it's been greased or if it's got a decade of caked hardened grease in there and it hasn't been greased. I am very religious about greasing in my machines. They see a lot of grease, and all the fittings you'll see have fresh grease on them. But this one here, it's very common for dirt to be packed into that one, so I'm always constantly cleaning it out. And the fittings all take grease. It's probably worth its weight in gold to take a grease gun with you to look at a machine and sit there and grease the machine, because that'll tell you, A, how much grease it takes to get the grease to come out, B, what color and how nasty the grease is that comes out, and C, if the fittings even take the grease, because a fitting that hasn't been greased in a long time, a lot of times will get hardened grease built up in it, and it won't even accept new grease when you go to grease it. You'll have to change the fitting, and sometimes that doesn't even work. Sometimes the grease is actually hardened into the pathways in the bushing, and you'll have to get in there and actually clean all that out before it'll even accept grease again. So yeah, some pins and bushings are easier to change than others, whereas these two main pins here that hold on this pivot on my machine, they're both wore out. And not only are they hard to replace because you have to take all these hydraulic lines out of the way, you have to support the boom with another machine or cribbing or whatever you got, and they're going to be hard to get out of there. Not only are they hard to get out, they're expensive. I think you're looking at almost $800 for the pins and bushings to fix that knuckle. So we were talking about slop and pivot points. Now I'm going to show you how you check for that. You take the boom and you push down on the ground just enough to take the weight off of the boom, and you'll be able to see if there's movement up and down in the pins and the bushings and all the other pivots. So I'm going to do it several times, lifting the boom up and down, taking the weight off of it, putting it back on. Watch this pin, watch these pins, and these two down here, and you might even be able to see this one. They all got a lot of slop. Also the main boom pin up here. They all move around, they all have slop. There we go, you watching? Another big pivot that you might not even think of and can be extremely costly if you have to repair it is your swing bearing, which is the bearing that holds the entire cab onto the track frame. It's that little piece right there. It's inside of there, and it's a bearing. And if that bearing goes out, you have to support the entire upper half of the machine, disconnect the track frame, slide it out of there, and I'm sure that the bearing is quite expensive that goes in there because it's going to be a really, really big bearing. So it's a very involved and very costly job. So the same principles apply as if we were checking the knuckle up there. It's ideal to have somebody watch you as you do that and pick the machine up and down, taking all the weight on and off of the machine. And if there's slop in that bearing, you'll see it like this. And you can also, sometimes I've heard if they get very bad, when you're swinging the machine back and forth, you can actually feel that bearing getting gritty or grinding underneath you. So you can use that same principle to every single one of the pins and bushings on the boom. It's just how you manipulate them to get them to show their slop. Shims can also make a difference too. I'm not certain how, but my thumb here was tight when I put it on, and now I've got almost a 1/4 inch gap in the shims. So it slides back and forth, and I need to re-shim that, because the more you let it slide back and forth, the more it hammers on it while you're running, and it just keeps tearing it up more and more. So while we're on the subject of the boom and the pivots and all that, kind of ties right into leaks. Unless you got a brand new machine, it's pretty likely that you're going to have some sort of hydraulic leak somewhere. Hoses get dry and brittle and crack. They start leaking. The fittings where they connect start leaking. O-rings wear out, get hard, and they start leaking. And the big one that a lot of people get really afraid of is your packing in your cylinders. So a lot of people get really afraid of packing when it starts leaking, and so you can either take the cylinder off, send it into a shop, and have them put new seals in it, and hopefully your chrome is okay. So the biggest thing to look at on your cylinders if they are leaking is the condition of the chrome, which is the shiny part right here, the part that goes in and out of that packing all day long while you're running this machine. These rods have to go in and out of that seal. So if there's any burrs, like this one has a very small, not sure if you can see it, there's a really small ding right there, and you can just barely catch your fingernail on it. But that's something that'll actually help wear out the seals that much faster and cause a leak again. Leaking cylinders are not nearly as big a deal as people make them out to be. If you're even slightly handy and have some tools, albeit heavy duty tools, you can take these apart and put new seals in them yourself for cheap to a few $100s. You know, it just depends on what cylinders you're doing, how big they are, and all that. Small cylinders can be repacked very cheaply and quickly if you have any inclination. So I'm sure you heard all that growling and groaning up there, and it doesn't sound good because it's not. That brings me to my next point, is your undercarriage. Now, as I said earlier, the undercarriages on track hose don't take as much abuse as, say, a dozer, but they definitely still do get a lot of wear, and they're very important. This machine is so much more productive when it's easy and quick to move around and you're not like worrying that the track's gonna fall off or something. So this track I have intentionally loosened so as to not put any more strain on this idler bushing because the bushing's gone out of it. If I track this thing in a straight line, it'd be hard to show on camera, but I can actually see this wheel up here. This is your front idler. Holds the track on the frame. I can actually see there's some slop in it, and the track kind of wanders. Now the track's not wandering on the idler itself. It's in here. The entire idler is moving in the track frame. The nice thing about looking at the undercarriage on an excavator is you can do what I've done here and lift the track up off the ground using the boom. And you can get in here and spin all your bottom rollers and feel if they're free, if they're gritty, if they locked up, whatever. And you can also see how worn the flanges are. So this bit of information applies to any machine with an undercarriage on it. When you're looking at your undercarriage, you're looking at the wear on these parts here. This is your pad, this is your chain, these are your bottom rollers. Got rock guards, front idler, and on an excavator that's your drive back there with the sprocket on it. So it's got big teeth on it, just like any other piece of track driven equipment. These teeth wear out. Mine are not too bad on this machine. I'd say there's probably still about 80%. So the only way your pads will really wear out is if they get too thin this direction, they start bending up really easy. So if your machine you're looking at's got a bunch of bent pads on it, it's probably been in some rocky ground and seen some abuse, and you might need to get new pads if they are getting pretty thin. Now these are what are typically referred to as triple grousers or street pads. So each individual pad has 1, 2, 3 bars on it. Now they make double grousers, which as the name implies, only have 2 bars on it and are a little bit taller than street pads. So they'll tear up asphalt if you go out on asphalt, but not nearly as bad as single grousers, which are like dozers are equipped with, and they have one tall single rail that runs across there, one bar that engages the ground. So in ways of traction, your single grouser is going to be the most traction. Double grouser would be a happy medium between tearing everything up and getting good traction. And then street pads, which are still not terrible for traction, but I can run this thing right down the road and all it's going to do is leave a little bit of white marks on it, but they'll go away pretty quick. So that brings us to the chain. Now it's going to be hard to show you, but this face right here where my finger is the area where the sprocket engages on the track. And now that's both sides of this pin as well. So wherever that pushes on the rod up here to drive the track around will start to wear. And usually if there's excessive wear on them, you can feel if this will be a low spot right here. There'll be a big divot worn in. So aside from your pins wearing, the bushing inside of them can also wear out, and the tracks will start to have slop this way or this way. So just pay attention to the tracks when you're picking the machine up and you run the tracks like I did up in the air. Kind of pay attention. It's good to have somebody with you that can sit there and watch that stuff and how it reacts to all the twists and turns and binds you put on it, and seeing if they're pretty rigid or if they're flopping all over the place. That's a bad sign. Now your rollers, as long as they spin free, they should be pretty stiff like this. They shouldn't spin super easy, but they shouldn't be hard to spin either. You should be able to easily do it like I am. And they should not feel gritty or rough at all. Shouldn't hear any noises in them. That means they're good. They're tight. Sometimes they'll start to leak out their oil. These are permanently sealed, so if you see an oil stain on them or something, that means that the seal's gone bad and the dirt's going to work its way into there, and it's that one's on its way out for sure. Also, the flanges in here where the chain rides, these can wear out, become very loose, and that'll also help wear out your chain faster. But I'd say typically the bearings go out of these before the flanges wear out, but not always. And you do have a top roller. Some machines have more, some machines have less. I don't think I've ever seen a machine with more than 2, but you know, it's going to be hard for you to get the track weight off of this thing to turn it. But just pay attention while you're moving the machine. Make sure this thing's turning as it should. Another thing to look for while you're inspecting your undercarriage is loose pads. There's about 2 or 3 pads on this machine that are loose, and I've been too lazy to fix, because you actually have to take the torch and cut the bolts off typically and put new bolts in it, crank them down, because when they start to wear, the bolts are 99% of the time are not going to tighten up. They're going to be too messed up. That's typically not a big deal unless it gets so bad that the chain is worn from bolts rocking back and forth in there. So the last thing you can do to make sure your undercarriage and your drives are okay is basically just track it around for a while. That bad idler doesn't show itself until you get it hot. So if I just track from here to the dirt pile, not going to be an issue. But if I tracked all the way over to that brick house over there, it starts to get really hot and it'll start to slow down that side because it's putting so much drag on it. So what I have to do is I end up holding this side and backing off of this side a little bit to keep tracking straight. Otherwise I'd start to veer off course. The machine does not like to overcome all that extra drag. So just run it around for a while, do some twisting and turning, and that'll start to tell you if you have a weak drive motor. You'll be able to tell if one lags more than the other one. Sometimes that can be an adjustment, but I'd definitely be more concerned that it's a drive than an adjustment. So keeping right on with the preventative maintenance theme, before you even start the engine, it's nice to start a cold engine because that'll tell you a lot more than a warm engine will. You want to see how it starts when it's cold. But I won't say most, a lot of people, when they do filter changes and fluid changes, they'll write the hours that they did them on the filter. So I just changed this filter at 7,005 hours. You want to look at those filters and then compare them to the hour meter on the machine to see that they have been changed within a reasonable time period. Each machine's going to have a different interval. I think oil changes for me, I usually do about every 250 hours. So all the machines are different, but you're at least going to have a oil filter, a fuel filter, a hydraulic filter, and an air filter. You're going to want to check all those and look at the hours on them if they're marked. If not, pull your air filter out, make sure it's not packed full of dirt. My hydraulic filter is in the tank, so I can't really show that to you. But check all your fluids before you start it. Look at them, see what color they are. This oil's pretty clean still. All diesels are always going to be pretty dark oil. Even if you just change them, they usually get dark pretty quick. My overfill bottle here for my antifreeze has a leak down here somewhere, so the bottle's always empty, but I always check the radiator and it's always topped off. So before you start it, while you're in here looking at the engine compartment, you're going to want to look over the entire engine and anything else you can see for leaks, things of that nature. If you got a lot of buildup of grease and oil and grime over a long period of time, that'll tell you that there's been a problem for a long time that they're neglecting. Stuff like this is one of the things I missed in the dark when I bought this machine, is the wiring is pretty botched. Somebody got in here and did some creative thinking on it, and consequently there is some wiring issues with this machine. Things like this I didn't pay attention to when I bought this machine, and I wish I had. There's no latch on this, and you can see where previous owners have attempted to put different latches on it, and either they broke or whatever, but they're not there anymore. So I've been using a dirty old bungee cord for 2 years now, holding this stinking hood down whenever I'm running it because it'd bounce up. The reason I never did anything more permanent on that either is because I kind of always had the dream of taking this cheap fiberglass hood off of here and building a custom metal enclosure for it, but I don't know if time will ever allow that. Let's talk about the cab real quick before we start it. This seat can tell you a lot. They're not cheap to replace, and you're going to want to make sure it's pretty comfortable because you could be spending 10-12 hours a day in the seat, if not more, depending on your style. Or could be a couple hours, not that big a deal to you. It depends on what you're intending to do with the machine. But I'm first to tell you, if you're going to spend 10 hours on your butt playing with the joysticks, you're going to want a good seat. This one looks rough, but it's actually pretty comfortable still. So to be entirely honest, I don't know if this engine has ever been overhauled or rebuilt, but this machine has 7,110 hours on the clock, and it still starts up really good. This is a cold start. I haven't started it in quite a while. No muss, no fuss, no smoke, no dust. It starts up very easily, idles very easily. The only time it has a little bit of trouble with it is in the extreme cold, because the grid heater on the intake doesn't work, which is some of that wiring issue I was talking about. So we'll let this idle a second and then we'll get it moving. So I kind of glossed over a lot of the nitty-gritty on the engine here, but basically you're just wanting to cold start it, listen to how it starts. If it starts up real quick and easy, it sounds like it's probably a good tight motor. If it cranks and cranks and cranks and then it finally fires, you might have a loss of compression, or it might be starting to get to be a tired engine. Run it for a good while, get it good and hot up to operating temperature, make sure it's not overheating. Then what I like to do to check for a bad head gasket is, after the machine's up to operating temperature, get you a good heavy rag, put it over the radiator cap, crack the cap loose. There should be some pressure in there naturally due to the heat. If there isn't any pressure after that's up to operating temperature, then you know there's a leak in the system somewhere and it's not building up radiator pressure. But after you get the cap off, run it for a while at a good high idle and sit there and watch inside the radiator, and if you get any air bubbles coming up, that's going to mean that you have a head gasket bad and you're getting compression into your coolant. Lastly, just sit there and listen to the engine while it's running. Listen to hear if you have any mysterious noises or knocking sounds that sound suspicious. Depending on how much you're going to be spending on the machine, it might be worth your while to actually sample the oil and do an oil analysis on it. So I think we've pretty well covered the nuts and bolts of what to look for if you're in the market for one of these things. The biggest question is going to be, what size machine do you need and how do I need it equipped? So for me, what I really wanted in a machine was something that I could move around with the truck that I had, which is a 10-ton single axle truck. So this machine weighs 18,000 pounds or thereabouts without the hydraulic thumb and the quick coupler. I prefer the steel undercarriage to the rubber tracks because I feel like they last longer and I can do everything, pretty much everything, with the steel tracks that I could with rubber tracks. I wanted a backfill blade because these things are extremely handy. Seldom do I use it for backfill, more I use it for keeping my area I'm working in clean because it's a lot faster than doing it all with the bucket and swiping it. And leveling the machine up is the big thing. The other thing is, if you sink that blade into the ground right there and you're reaching out here pulling on a tree stump, that blade keeps you from sliding towards the tree stump, or it helps you keep from lifting your rear end up as you're yanking on something. The other thing I really wanted to have is that swinging boom, which is where a lot of my slop is. And it is very handy when you need to have it, but if you don't need to have it, I don't recommend it because it is just a bunch of pivot points and places for wear to show itself. A hydraulic thumb in my world is extremely handy, and I definitely recommend one. If you do any kind of brush clearing, tree clearing, building demolition, it's pretty much a must-have. This is a work brow thumb. I added this thumb to the machine, and not all machines can easily add a hydraulic thumb. This machine has the auxiliary plumbing, which is basically a couple extra lines out here, a hydraulic circuit that I could add this to and plumb in so that this thumb opens and closes. Whereas if you didn't have that plumbing, you would either have to add it, which would be very costly and hard to do, I'd imagine, or you can get a manual thumb which just fixes into one position and you bring the bucket to the thumb rather than the thumb come to the bucket. Lastly, the thing that I made sure that I had when I bought this machine was a quick coupler. This is a JRB quick coupler, and I would love to demonstrate it for you, but I broke the wires on it the last time I was doing some clearing work and haven't got around to fixing it yet. But basically, you flip a switch in the cab and run the bucket all the way in and curl it up, and it releases the hydraulic ram that's inside of that bucket there, and you can just drop the bucket right off and switch to a different size bucket. So this machine actually came with this 2-foot bucket and a 1-foot bucket. So I can't answer the questions for you about what size machine you should get, but look at the manufacturer's websites, see how big a machine will lift how much weight if you're going to be lifting a lot of things. But if you have, say, a farm and you're not planning on hauling the machine around a lot, you can actually pick up a used large excavator, pretty reasonable, and you know, just pay to have it hauled to your place one time, and that's it. You don't have to worry about hauling it again. But if you're planning on buying a machine to take out and do jobs with, definitely make sure you're able to haul it yourself, because you'll go broke paying somebody to move your equipment for you. So the last thing I guess we should talk about is brands. Everybody has their own favorite brand. I'm not out here to advocate for one or the other. This is my second Komatsu machine. I also have a Komatsu bulldozer. I'm very happy with Komatsu, but I think I'm happy with them because their parts are reasonably affordable, and I have a dealer close by. Now, if you live somewhere where there's not a Komatsu dealer close by, that could be an issue, and that's not just Komatsu, that's any brand. As far as I know, Caterpillar has the biggest dealer service network in the world, and they can get you pretty much anything next day or within a couple days. That being said, I don't think Caterpillar's machines are particularly built any better than most other manufacturers. There's some manufacturers that I do not like, such as Doosan. I'm not a big fan of Case. It's all personal preference though. The biggest thing for you, if you're looking at a piece of equipment, is going to be, can I get parts? Can I get service? So if you don't have a Komatsu dealer or a Case dealer or a Takeuchi dealer anywhere near you, probably not the best idea. I don't care what brand you get, parts for these things are not cheap. They're usually pretty pricey depending on what it is. So if you have to drive 3 hours to the nearest dealer to pick up a part so you can urgently finish a job to meet a deadline, that's going to be a make or break thing for you. All my jobs that I do are low pressure. That's why I can get away with having an older machine that has its quirks and has its breakdowns. Although, knock on wood, this machine has never actually broken down and left me stranded on a job. So like I said, I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff that I missed. So if you think of anything, drop it down in the comments there. Help the people out watching this video that are looking for a used piece of equipment. And this stuff was all just coming to my head as I was doing this, so I might jump around a little bit, or I might have forgot a few things. But if you like the video, hit the thumbs up button, and let's play with this thing for a few minutes, huh?